the Middle East, more or less just days after Sweden caused a minor diplomatic firestorm by announcing it plans to recognize Palestine as a state. Last night, British lawmakers voted overwhelmingly in favor of the motion, a non-binding decision, but nonetheless a very important one. The Israeli embassy has responded, emphasizing again the view that this kind of recognition sharply undermines a real negotiated peace deal with concessions. Joining me now from London is our I-24 News correspondent there, Jonathan Sacerdoti. Jonathan, good morning.
Good morning.
So it was said in UK Parliament that this decision is part of a, quote, contribution to securing a negotiated two-state solution, which, of course, does not seem to be the view of the United States and Israel. What do you think? Is this the view in the UK, that this is the path to a two-state solution?
Well, in fact, that particular section that you quote there is an amendment that was added to the original debate motion. And that amendment was there presumably to make it somewhat easier for MPs who felt that they might be betraying their allegiance to a country which is a strong ally of the UK, Israel, in voting for this motion. So the amendment was proposed by a senior cross-party group of MPs, including Labour's former Foreign Secretary Jack Straw and the Conservatives' Alan Duncan. And that addition of as a contribution to securing a negotiated two-state solution was intended to somehow make sure that this didn't look like a unilateral act. Of course, it doesn't really have that effect, and what it does is create even more confusion in what was already quite a confusing vote. How this is a contribution to a negotiated two-state solution isn't clear, and exactly how this could, in some way, further the peace process, which at the moment is completely stalled, is also not clear. But what we did have was 4 hours of rigorous debate in the House of Commons here in the United Kingdom, resulting in this very strong vote in favour of that motion, which doesn't change any part of UK foreign policy regarding Israel and the Palestinians. That was made perfectly clear by the Prime Minister's spokesman before the vote.
Jonathan, so you mentioned it won't change the government policy, but we knew it was a symbolic vote from the beginning. But how much symbolism does it have? How much power can this vote have? Because the UK is certainly an important country in this greater picture.
One part of what's been going on, obviously, over the decades of this ongoing conflict is that there's a PR war going on top of all the other forms of war that are also part of the conflict itself. And in terms of the PR war, this is significant because the headlines today are that UK lawmakers have backed the recognition of a Palestinian state. Dig a little deeper and you'll see that really it's not quite so simple. Other than the fact that it's non-binding and doesn't change the UK's policy at all, we can also see that of the 649 members of Parliament, only 207 voted for the amended motion. 12 voted against, which means that 363 abstained by not attending, which was the option given to the Labour Party MPs who were pushed by a three-line whip to vote in favour of the motion, but told that if it was against their wishes, they could simply not attend. Similarly, David Cameron, the Prime Minister, didn't attend the debate and didn't vote, and nor did Cabinet Ministers under his instruction. So it's not exactly clear that even the majority of MPs particularly support this motion. If they had done, they would have turned up to the debate and they would have voted for it.
Jonathan, stay on the line with us for a moment. I just want to go back to you, Elad, for a moment. Though negotiation is clearly essential, at least the U.S. and Israel make it clear that negotiation concessions are essential, could this be effective, as Sweden and the U.K. claim, in sort of pushing Israel into a corner to force Israel to negotiate?
Well, the Israeli government claims now and again that this will only harm the process and damage all the efforts to try and reach an agreement, to talk about any agreement, which we are not there yet. I think that the Israeli government is reluctant to reignite these negotiations. If this motion or if this wave will be overwhelming and if it will have some sanctions attached to it, I think that the Israeli government will have no choice but to consider how to deal with it. I'm not vowing that they will necessarily join the negotiating table again.
The current Israeli government will do it?
This can hurt the Israeli government. And by the way, regarding this non-binding symbolic vote in London last night, well, this is all true, but all those who oppose this idea could have shown and vote against it, which is also a bit of symbolic, the fact that they decided to stay home and not join the debate and not to confront the issue directly.
Right. The question is if not confronting is necessary, it's not necessarily supporting. It's a fine line
no doubt, but it's not necessarily against it either.
It's not against, which is probably the best Israel can hope for at this point. Jonathan, from your view from London, in Israel a lot of times, I can't say the society as a whole, but there is certainly a section that sort of blocks out what the world is saying, that they're always against us, this sort of notion. From your view in London, popular opinion both on the street and in the government, is this something Israel has to pay attention to?
Israel can't help but pay attention to what's going on in the United Kingdom and in other parts of the world, with more and more countries and international bodies bowing to the pressure from the Palestinians to unilaterally recognize a state that doesn't exist yet. Many of the speeches in the House of Commons yesterday in this 4-hour-long debate did in fact admit that there are no borders, there are no organs of state, that really the state that they were recognizing was something that might exist in the future, but they were recognizing it now in principle in order to assist Mahmoud Abbas in his attempt to internationalize the conflict. That is significant, even if it doesn't actually change the UK's official position, which is that it does not yet recognize a Palestinian state. The official government position is still that it can do and will do at a time of its choosing when it feels that it's helpful towards that two-state solution. But yes, of course it's significant. And a country like Britain, which some are suggesting these days punches well above its weight in terms of international geopolitics, a country like Britain having this expression of intention of the will of the majority of the MPs voting last night, even if it doesn't particularly change policy, does show that there is a shift somewhat in public opinion here. Remember that those MPs last night were not thinking quite so much necessarily about Israelis and Palestinians as they were about their own constituents and who votes for them. And those people, they felt, might have been satisfied by this sort of expression of support for a Palestinian state, when actually they knew it would have little or no effect over in the region itself. So again, it's a symbolic act that maybe shows something of a shifting of opinion among voters here in the UK, when politicians feel that this sort of gesture will satisfy them.
Jonathan, you bring up an important point that I've heard a lot of analysts speaking about in the Swedish case as well, that, again, we're talking about domestic interests, just like we were discussing a moment ago with the Islamic State group, with the fight against it, that these countries, in the end, have to answer to their own constituents, to their own elections. How much is what you're talking about, is the Muslim presence in the UK influencing the policy? How much does that drive UK policy in the last several years?
Certainly that's a part of what influences decisions like this, though it's very difficult to attribute decisions and public opinion to specifically Muslim opinion or any other sector of the community here. It is true to say that during Operation Protective Edge and the airstrikes and then ground incursions from Israel into Gaza, there was a swelling of opinion here against Israel, which was driven quite in a large part by the news coverage in the UK, which was extremely negative towards Israel, emphasizing the damage and the loss of life in Gaza rather than some sort of more balanced approach showing the reasons for the attack and the now somewhat clearer ratio of civilian to combatant deaths being actually, in terms of warfare, rather balanced and equal, showing a level of quite targeted attacks on Israel's part. Now, that sort of thing helped public opinion here to swell in one particular way, which was against Israel. And when we see that sort of thing happening in the streets here, people writing to their MPs, there's an enormous support of people for the Palestinian cause in the United Kingdom who will actually get out and vote with their feet, go to rallies, go to protests and write letters. It's hard to know how typical that is of the average Briton. Many people, of course, don't express an opinion on this. But that is more and more visible every day and is presumably part of a more and more well-organized lobby against Israel or in favor of the Palestinians. And that has had this knock-on effect in making MPs here feel that this is the way they need to vote in order to satisfy mainstream public opinion.
Arad, Speaking about going forward, can Israel recover from all this damage that Jonathan is talking about that was done in Operation Protective Edge going forward?
Yes, definitely. Reigniting the peace process. I think that negotiations with the Palestinians is in Israel's interest. It hurts Israel to keep it the way it is. I've been speaking to some diplomatic sources in the Prime Minister's office yesterday, last night, and they stressed the fact that they will not negotiate with the unity Palestinian government because they deal with Hamas, because Hamas is represented there. They are willing, they say that they're willing to negotiate with Abbas, but as long as Abbas adheres to this unity government with Hamas, they will not join the negotiating table, which, if you ask my analysis or my perception, I think it is wrong, because as we know, you have to deal with those that you have a dispute with. And at the moment, the last fight in Gaza was against Hamas, apparently, not against
But the Israeli government, this one, it seems, will always find a little bit of criteria because of which we cannot negotiate at this moment.
That's our expertity.
Well, John Kerry, at least in Cairo, said he's willing and wants to start another peace process.
I salute him for that. That's very courageous out of him, but unfortunately, until there will be a proper program to negotiate on, I don't think that the Americans... He
can come visit here and go to the beach.
Mind you, that's his second visit to the region where he did not come to Jerusalem. Yes. So maybe it shows something. It's a big move
for him.
Yes.
Jonathan Sacerdoti, thanks very much for being with us from London. Radnir, thanks very much again.
My pleasure.